Hey guys, tonight we slip back in time to a world where your best chance at a stable career might involve daggers, disguises, and the occasional rooftop getaway under moonlight. You're crouched in the shadow of a chimney, breath shallow, thatched straw groaning beneath your boots. One bad step and the roof caves in. A dog barks 3 houses down. You freeze. Welcome to life as a medieval assassin, where nothing is ever simple, especially not your rent. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and time in the comments. Are you drifting off in Dallas or listening wide awake in Virginia? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through filth-matted alleys after another soul-sucking job. Your tunic soaked through from last night's rain, and your boots, don't even ask. They squelch with every step, a moist reminder that stealth footwear was never on the market. You'd think as a clandestine killer for hire, you'd at least get a stipend for better gear. But no. Your landlord wants payment in silver, not in half-rotten meat or rumors of blackmail. Tonight's contract involved climbing a grocer's roof to reach an attic window. Simple. Until your foot punched clean through a straw tile and you fell into the poor man's storage loft. He screamed, you screamed, his goat screamed. Somehow in the confusion, you still managed to slip a vial of nightshade into his stew and roll off into the evening. Smooth, right? Well, you also now smell like pickled radish and goat hair. You'd like to complain to your guild, but first, you have to deal with your lodging. Medieval landlords make modern ones look like saints. You rent a moldy corner of a bakery's basement. No windows. Rent is paid weekly, and if you're late, they lock your cot to the floor and feed your stuff to the pigs. You learn to hide your possessions in flour sacks just to survive. You've tried other housing options. A stonemason once offered you a drafty tool shed in exchange for occasional favors, which turned out to mean cleaning up after his cousin's failed alchemy experiments. Ever tried scraping boiled ox dung off a stone floor with a chipped shell? Let's just say you haven't known hardship until you've bartered body disposal tips for a bowl of barley soup. Historically speaking, real medieval cities, like 13th century London or Florence, had sprawling slums teeming with disease, crime, and desperate souls. For folks on the margins, like say, you, housing was less livable and more, how long can I stay before the ceiling collapses? Archaeologists have found records of rent disputes involving rooms literally held together with wattle and mud. But here's where it gets fun. Some assassins actually chose to live above public bathhouses. Why? Easy access to gossip, naked nobles, and warm air rising from below. Cozy, right? Until you realize the stink of unfiltered bathwater is now permanently embedded in your cloak. Oh, and let's not forget the wildlife. Rats run the rooftops like they own them. One bit your toe last week. You bled into your boot for hours and didn't notice because you were too busy dodging an inquisitor. And pigeons? Pigeons everywhere. Some historians argue whether feral pigeons were ever trained for message delivery or if they were just an ambitious scam run by clever boys with bird cages. You sleep in snatches, listening for guards or disgruntled clients. Once a baker's wife tried to drown you in sourdough starter because she swore she saw you kill her cousin. You didn't. Probably. What makes things worse is that every rooftop is a gamble. Clay tiles crack, wooden shingles splinter, and those charming hay-covered homes? Fire hazards just begging for lightning or drunk torch wielders. You tiptoe along beams barely wider than your wrist, praying you don't make a sound. One night, you found yourself clinging to a chimney while the house burned from the inside. The family ran out screaming. You climbed down into the smoke and walked away with singed eyebrows and a story no one will believe. That's the medieval assassin lifestyle. Underpaid, overexposed, and perennially damp. But tomorrow's another mission, and you can't afford to look tired, because a tired assassin is a dead one. You brush soot off your sleeve and slide back into the alley's embrace, stomach growling, head aching, heart racing. After all, you've got to get up early and roof hop across town for poison. Again. You're crouched by candlelight in a drafty corner of the apothecary's cellar, squinting at a cracked vial filled with something that looks like regret and smells like wilted cabbage. The guild's latest shopping list reads like a "don't eat this unless you're trying to commit a felony" challenge. Belladonna, hemlock, powdered bone, and a side of dried beetle wing. You roll your eyes. This is not exactly the glamorous life of a killer elite. It's medieval chemistry with consequences. The thing about poison, it's moody. One day, a dab on a slice of rye bread will knock out a knight in 2 heartbeats. The next, the same formula merely gives him gas and a sudden appreciation for indoor plumbing, which doesn't exist yet. Medieval poison-making is equal parts guesswork, trial by error, and whispered hearsay passed around in dingy taverns. You wish you had a real guidebook, something like Lethal Recipes for Dummies. But no, your training was a 2-day crash course where you were told, if it foams, it probably works. One old mentor swore by rubbing deadly herbs into candle wax. Another preferred hiding toxins in fancy ink and forging love notes. Historians still argue whether poisoners preferred ingestion or skin absorption techniques, and whether anyone truly understood dosage beyond, looks like enough. Take Nightshade, for example. It's a classic, except the berries look like shiny grapes, and once you saw a child munch one and burp, completely unharmed. Meanwhile, a baron's cook accidentally stirred the leaves into a stew and took out half the castle staff. It's all very unpredictable and deeply inconvenient when your job depends on precise outcomes. You once tried using mandrake root, following a guild recipe that involved boiling it under a full moon while humming a monk's chant backward. You felt ridiculous, and when your target slumped mid-prayer in the cathedral pew the next day, you congratulated yourself until he sat up moments later, yelled something about divine visions, and launched into an impromptu sermon. Turns out you'd given him a powerful laxative and a lot of confidence. In real medieval times, poisoning was often feared more than it was successfully executed. Chronicles from places like Venice and Paris paint poisoners as sorcerers and demons, often blamed for unexplained deaths, especially if they were women. The line between herbalist, assassin, and unlucky cook was thin, and getting caught with the wrong vial could land you in chains, or worse, in stocks next to someone throwing cabbages. Still, there's a thriving black market for your services. Nobles love to whisper about mysterious deaths. You've delivered tinctures that taste like almond wine, smell like perfume, or burn the tongue like anger distilled. You once dosed a nobleman's bathwater. He broke out in boils and canceled every public appearance for weeks. Apparently, his mistress was not thrilled. But the real kicker is poison ingredients are outrageously expensive. You need rare roots from far-off trade caravans, oils distilled from plants that only grow on cliff faces, and powders from mushrooms that scream when plucked. Okay, they don't really scream, but the foragers do. You spend most of your earnings just acquiring the stuff. One merchant tried to sell you dried toad bits as assassin's delight. You still have no idea what it was, but your hands itched for a week.
Sometimes you try to economize. Crushed walnut shells and vinegar will sometimes mimic an upset stomach if mixed right. Other times, they just create a very angry drunk. You learned that the hard way when a guard you were trying to softly remove ended up chasing you 2 blocks with a chamber pot and a grudge. There's also competition. Other poisoners get flashy. Colored potions, glittery flasks. One self-styled herbal mage wore embroidered robes and charged triple for what was basically garlic water with a twist of mint. You hate him on principle. In one of the weirder moments of your career, you met a scholar who insisted that the best assassination method was exposure to moldy rye bread. Ergot, he called it. Induces madness, he whispered, eyes wide. Sure, but only if your target eats 6 loaves and waits 3 days. Not exactly ideal when the count you're targeting is leaving town tonight. Still, there's power in knowing these little dark tricks. You may not always get it right, but when you do, when the dosage sings and the target slumps quietly without theatrics, it feels like art. Ugly, tragic, wicked art. The kind they don't hang in cathedrals. You rinse your fingers in a rain barrel and wipe them on your cloak. You've got 3 flasks hidden in your belt pouch. One guaranteed fatal, one for severe discouragement, and one that might just make the drinker confess their darkest secret and cry into their soup. You forget which is which. Guess you'll find out.
You grip the rope tighter, knuckles aching as your boots scrape the side of the stone wall. It's a full moon tonight. Not ideal. You wanted fog. You got moonlight, bats, and the disapproving gaze of a gargoyle carved like it's judging your posture. Still, you're halfway up the outer wall of a minor lord's manor, and the target's quarters are 3 stories above your pay grade. Getting in? That part's almost fun. It's the getting out that might end with you in chains, missing teeth, or politely dead. You glance over your shoulder. The moat's down there, more sludge than water, and it's definitely home to at least one eel the size of your arm. You're not eager to test whether medieval dentistry can fix a bite like that. The stone beneath your fingers is rough, unforgiving. Every crevice smells faintly of moss and, oddly, boiled turnips. You figure it's the kitchen chimney nearby. That means you're close. 3 more footholds, then you swing around to the iron-barred window. There's a servant snoring just inside, thankfully face down on the table. You slip in with the elegance of a startled cat. The room reeks of tallow and onion. You grimace. You're supposed to be all shadows and daggers, not fighting the urge to sneeze from the dust. This isn't a grand keep. It's a glorified vegetable warehouse with delusions of nobility. Still, the man inside owes someone a debt, and your presence is the polite reminder. Assassins in your line of work rarely got the pleasure of walking through the front gate. Medieval fortifications were made for sieges, not stealth. Walls were thick, windows narrow, and guards plentiful. Once inside, though, maneuvering was surprisingly easy if you knew the servants' paths, the rhythms of candle snuff-outs, and where the floor creaked near the chapel. Real 12th century manuscripts mention hired blades disguising themselves as monks, messengers, or even plague cart attendants to sneak in unnoticed. But the hard part? Leaving. Exits are tricky when your entrance involves scaling ivy and regretting every life decision. There's no second rope waiting, no noble's distraction to cover your retreat. You have to improvise. Tonight's improvisation involves stealing a chambermaid's apron, a dented tray, and walking straight out with the kitchen staff. It works, mostly, until someone yells, "She has a beard!" and you're sprinting through the herb garden while cabbage-wielding cooks give chase. You once tried diving into a cart full of hay. Hollywood makes it look so graceful. In reality, twigs in places twigs should not be. And the cart was rolling downhill, straight into a dung heap. When the stable boy found you, he asked if you were the ghost of bad decisions. Historians still argue whether most medieval assassinations were truly stealth operations, or if many killers relied more on bribery, distraction, or very loud exits. One chronicle from Sicily details an assassin who lit a tapestry on fire and ran. That's not stealth, that's arson with flair. You've learned to leave markers. Half-closed shutters, a loosened tile, chalk scratchings on barrels. These are your trails back out, if nobody's disturbed them. Once, a stray goat ate my marking straw bundle. I got lost inside a brewery for 5 hours, mildly tipsy and very annoyed. And dogs. Why is it always dogs? Not just fearsome hunting breeds either. Tiny, yapping courtyard gremlins with rage issues. I've been bitten more by lapdogs than guards. I once had to fake a sneeze fit to distract one long enough to escape over a hedge. I've never forgiven poodles since. But let's not forget the real risk. Recognition. Killing someone is one thing, being remembered doing it, that's terminal. I've worn wigs, fake beards, even a nun's habit. The nun disguise actually worked. Until a drunk squire proposed marriage, I murmured a quick blessing and vanished behind the ale barrels. And if you think the shadows will keep you safe, not when every torch-lit hallway is lined with polished armor, reflecting every move you make like a funhouse from hell. I once knocked over a helmet, sending it clanging down the stairs and alerting half the garrison. Your improvisation. Pretend to be an apprentice minstrel. Your lute impression still gets laughs back at the guild. Eventually, you make it to the rear postern gate. It's bolted, of course. You wedge it open with a stolen soup ladle. Don't ask. Slip out under the archway and breathe the damp night air like it's your first breath ever. Mission accomplished. Well, mostly. Your target isn't dead, just frightened. You were supposed to deliver a warning. You left a finger from a pig's trotter on his pillow. Close enough. It's symbolic. You limp into the alleyway, bruised, bleeding slightly, but intact. You promise yourself next time you'll pick a quieter contract. Maybe in the country. Fewer dogs. But you know better. You'll be back on another rooftop by week's end, whispering curses at the moon and wondering why you ever thought this job had glamour. You're back in the guild hall now, if you can even call it that. It's more of an abandoned wine cellar with aspirations. Candles flicker on damp stone walls, casting shaky shadows that make everyone look a bit more haunted than heroic. The air smells like old leather, pipe smoke, and that one guy who never bathes. You step over a snoring initiate, slumped across the floor, careful not to kick his crossbow. This is where your family meets. The brotherhood, the order, the secret circle of friends who may stab you if you take their coins. You'd think working in the shadows would lend itself to more drama-free relationships. Not so much. It turns out assassins are a petty, paranoid bunch with wildly differing opinions on poison etiquette and cloak maintenance. Tonight's meeting is about dues. again. The guildmaster stands at the front, reading names from a dusty ledger, and your name's always mispronounced. "You owe 2 silver crowns and a pint of goat's blood," he says flatly. You mouth back, "I thought the blood thing was metaphorical." It isn't. In reality, medieval guilds, particularly in cities like Florence or Ghent, acted as professional networks, power brokers, and social clubs. But clandestine ones? Far murkier. Some historians argue whether assassin guilds existed as formalized bodies or were just a romantic notion. Yet in whispers, there are tales of secretive cabals with coded knocks, rotating safe houses, and initiation rites involving candlelight vows and possibly live chickens. Your own initiation involved swearing silence, dodging a thrown dagger blindfolded, and drinking something that might have been turnip vodka or floor polish. Possibly both. And the rules? Endless. No unauthorized kills. No talking shop with civilians. No stealing contracts. You broke that one once, accidentally, and your punishment was spending a week dressed as a noble's footstool during dinner service. You've never felt so humiliated. Or sat on. There's guild drama, of course. Someone's always sleeping with someone else's herbalist. There's a long-standing feud between the knife specialists and the garrote purists. You think it's ridiculous. Everyone knows blowpipe users are the real weirdos. One guy, Barnack, swears he can hit a candle flame from 30 paces. No one's verified it, but he's constantly chewing something suspicious and squints a lot. Then there's the contracts. Your guild receives them via dead drops. Rolled parchment, hidden behind loose stones, inside gutted loaves of bread, once even in a hollowed-out wheel of cheese. You found that one. Smelled like betrayal and aged Gouda. Sometimes a contract sparks debate. Should we really take out a monk? Is the Baron's brother technically evil or just a spoiled idiot? These discussions inevitably devolve into shouting, followed by a ceremonial thumb wrestling match. Democracy, assassin style. And you can't forget guild politics. The current leader's been in charge for 10 years and refuses to step down. He says only death or unanimous vote can replace him. Guess which one he's counting on. You suspect he pads the vote by threatening to poison the wine at meetings. He never does, but the threat is oddly persuasive. There's a younger faction pushing for modernization, more efficient codes, training schedules, some kind of ledger system involving colored stones. You tried to care, but got distracted by a heated argument about whether throwing stars are cowardly. You think they're just lazy shurikens. You sneak toward the back room, your office. It's really just a crate near a cracked barrel of cider, but it's your crate. On it rests your ledger of kills, written in lemon juice for secrecy, a poorly balanced dagger, and a note from someone signed only M, asking for a quiet fix involving a goat, a tax collector, and a cursed ring. You'll need to ask follow-up questions, preferably sober. Tonight there's also the matter of little Myra, a 14-year-old prodigy who just completed her 3rd contract. Everyone's impressed, except you, because your 3rd contract involved hiding in a manure cart for 4 hours and not even getting the right guy. Historians still argue whether child assassins were trained or just desperate orphans with knives and nothing to lose. Either way, Myra's getting dangerously confident. You eye her warily. Kids these days. The guildmaster dismisses the meeting with a riddle and a birch. As everyone filters out, some to alley hideouts, others to brothel rooftops, you hang back. You're tired. Tired of the squabbles,
The dues, the expectation that just because you're good at what you do, you should love it. You don't. But you're not sure what else you can be. Still, for now, you collect your gear, scrawl a note to a contact in the next town, and leave through the trapdoor in the floor. The night awaits, and despite everything, there's something reassuring about its chill. At least it doesn't talk back.
You're standing in front of a full-length mirror. Well, a polished bit of pewter hammered flat by a blacksmith with dreams of being a beautician. You're trying to figure out how exactly you're supposed to look like an assassin. Not the dramatic version, mind you, the real deal. Black on black with a dramatic hood. Looks great at midnight, but terrible when scaling a terracotta roof at noon. You've learned the hard way. Black does not blend into sandstone, and your cloak is snagged on at least 3 weather vanes this month. You're adjusting your belt for the 3rd time when it finally hits you. Fashion is not your friend. The medieval world doesn't offer spandex, cargo pants, or sensible rubber soles. You're working with wool, leather, and whatever your guild's tailor could stitch together with a prayer and half a rat skin. Even your shoes are stiff, flat, and slippery when wet. Basically, you're walking around in a loud, sweaty billboard that says, "Please notice this suspicious figure lurking in the alley." Let's get one thing straight. Dressing like an assassin is more than just a choice. It's a constant, calculated compromise. You need mobility, camouflage, space for tools, and plausible deniability. That means sometimes disguising yourself as a merchant, sometimes a monk, and once, as you still try to forget, a juggler with a fake mustache and a chicken named Gregory. Gregory did not survive the mission. Historians still argue whether actual medieval assassins wore distinguishable uniforms. Most likely, they didn't. An assassin's best armor was anonymity, blending into a crowd, adopting the local fashion, or appearing so boring that no one remembers them. The iconic black hood? Probably theatrical flair, or lice-proof. Hard to say. You've tried experimenting. Earthy browns and greens work well in forests, grays help in city fog, but anything too baggy gets caught on nails, and tight clothes don't breathe. Once, in a moment of inspiration, you wore a tunic dyed midnight blue. Unfortunately, it bled in the rain, and you looked like you'd wrestled a squid. Accessories? A nightmare. Daggers chafe your thighs if the straps are loose, and garrotes tangle if you don't coil them just so. Throwing knives clink if they're not cushioned, and vials leak if you cap them too tight. You once doused yourself with sedative while running, collapsed face first into a compost heap. A pig found you before your mark did. Lucky. You've tried hiding weapons in plain sight. A cane that unscrews into a spear, belt buckles that shoot darts, even shoes with poisoned soles. But most of the time, simpler's better. A slim blade up the sleeve, a tiny blowpipe in a bracer, a smile that says, "I definitely won't stab you, yet." There was a trend, briefly, among the younger assassins. Matching insignias burned into their cloaks. For unity, they claimed. You rolled your eyes so hard they nearly stuck. The only unity that matters in your line of work is a shared understanding not to brag about your kills in taverns. And then there's the weight. You ever try climbing a 3-story wall with 10 pounds of steel strapped to your back? You creak like a dying lute and sweat like a hog at midsummer. There's nothing stealthy about wheezing as you attempt a dramatic leap across a courtyard. In one ill-advised moment, you took inspiration from a traveling troupe of mummers. They wore soft shoes, loose layers, and face paint. You painted a skull on your face and spooked your own client. Mission postponed. Makeup washed off in a puddle. A peasant chased you off with a spoon.
In some parts of the world, say among the legendary Hashashin of the Levant, assassins were said to don white robes and blend among monks or mystics. Truth or legend? Historians still debate, particularly since most records come from their enemies. But the idea of hiding in plain sight, timeless. Your guild has costume rules, of course. No jingling, no bright colors unless it's a misdirection, and no helmets. Too clunky, too noisy, and, let's be honest, you can't see or hear in those things. Still, some newer recruits insist on face masks, for intimidation, they claim. I think they just like the drama. You once knew a guy, Marcus the Modest, who wore a burlap sack and a rope belt. Claimed humility was the ultimate disguise. He disappeared last winter, possibly eaten by wolves, or insulted a noble's hat. No one's quite sure. So you compromise. Soft boots that leak, cloak with detachable sleeves, stitched crooked, neutral tunic with hidden pockets, one of which always smells faintly of onions. You blend as best you can, knowing full well that your biggest asset is movement, not mystery. Anyone can dress like death. Few can walk past a guard and vanish into mist with nothing but a nod. Before you head out tonight, you glance once more in the mirror. You look less like a deadly shadow and more like someone running late for a plague-themed dinner party. But hey, it's what's on the inside that kills people.
You're leaning against a damp stone wall, fingers numb, staring down at your latest acquisition, a crossbow. It looks fierce, sleek, deadly, until you try to actually use it. Then it transforms into a heavy, fickle lump of carpentry with the patience of a spoiled mule. You sigh. Another glorious invention brought low by reality. Crossbows are supposed to be elegant. Point, aim, fire. Instant medieval justice. But in your world, they're more likely to misfire, jam, or, on one occasion, dramatically fling the bolt 3 feet directly into your own boot. You bought this one off a toothless trader who swore it belonged to a knight. You now suspect that knight lost it in a tavern bet, possibly to a goat. It takes both hands and a foot to wind the string, and you need to do it somewhere private unless you want to spend 10 minutes looking like you're wrestling a particularly angry window shutter. Historically, crossbows were revolutionary, easy to learn, powerful enough to punch through armor, and terrifying to knights who preferred fair fights and living. Some were even banned by the church, which called them too cruel for Christians to use on each other. Of course, that didn't stop anyone, especially assassins looking for clean, distant kills. But let's be honest, your experience has been less clean and more, oops, I think it fired early. You remember your first job using one. Rooftop perch, clear target, perfect silence. You aimed, took a breath, and nothing. The string slipped. Your bolt arced into the air like it was trying to hit the moon. The guard below looked up, confused, then wandered off, while you just sat there, defeated, contemplating your life choices and the sting of splinters. The problem isn't just the mechanics, it's the transportation. Ever try sneaking through a crowded market with a full-size crossbow under your cloak? You end up knocking over baskets of figs and children. There's no mystery when every turn of your hip sends a loud clunk echoing through the alley. You once commissioned a collapsible model from a visionary craftsman who insisted on calling himself the clocksmith.
It folded down to the size of a large book and unfolded with a satisfying click. It also exploded the first time you loaded it. Took off your eyebrow. The clocksmith is now in hiding, probably in pieces. And bolts. Don't get me started. The good ones are expensive. The cheap ones warp and whistle in the wind like they're auditioning for a haunted forest. You've tried reusing some, but once the tip's bent, you're basically flinging a pointy stick and hoping your target has allergies. One of your guildmates, Janek, swears by the bolt between the ribs technique. Claims it's the most reliable method. But Janek also has a permanent limp and a weird twitch whenever someone says reload, so you take his advice with a handful of skepticism. Fringe fact. In one obscure Slavic account, a noble hired a crossbowman to fake an assassination attempt just to build mystique. The bolt grazed his sleeve. He acted terrified, gained sympathy. Historians still argue whether it was a political stunt or just very bad aim. You do get a thrill from it occasionally. That funk when it hits right, the way your target freezes mid-sentence like someone pressed pause on reality. That half-second when the crowd doesn't even register what has happened. Those moments are rare, but real, and deeply satisfying. But mostly, it's a chore. You tried hiding one in a basket of fruit once. The merchant caught you and screamed about weaponized plums. You've never run so fast while cradling something so pointy and fragile. You still smell pears when you're nervous. So now the crossbow is more a backup tool, a just-in-case I get a balcony gig kind of thing. You prefer knives. Simple, reliable, quiet. No winding mechanisms, no rogue bolts, no angry chickens knocked off roofs mid-mission. Yes, that happened. Tonight, you stash the crossbow under your cot, wrapped in a faded cloak, oiled and loaded just in case. You whisper a silent apology to it. You know you won't use it unless absolutely necessary. But it's nice to feel like a real assassin should have one, even if yours is mostly for show. After all, nothing says professional menace like a very large, very awkward medieval contraption that's more likely to betray you than the mark.
You kneel in the back pew of a chapel lit by flickering tallow candles, head bowed, cloak damp from the drizzle outside. You're not praying, just pretending. You're here to meet a contact, maybe slip a vial into the sacristy wine, maybe find out who's been nosing around your contracts. But mostly, you're here to remind yourself of one unshakable truth. The church is always watching, and it absolutely has a file on you. There's a monk humming near the altar, back turned. Or maybe it's a guard in robes. Who can tell any more? You shift uneasily, hands folded, eyes scanning every stained glass window, as if Christ himself might wink and report your presence. It's not paranoia. It's protocol. In the real medieval world, church power was absolute. Whether you lived in 12th century Rome or 14th century York, religious institutions weren't just spiritual. They were political, judicial, and loaded with money. And wherever there's power, there are watchful eyes. Assassin work was risky enough, but being labeled a heretic, that got you flayed publicly, if you were lucky. Your guild keeps a tight leash on religious interactions. One wrong move, and you're not just dealing with inquisitors. You're facing excommunication, curses, and the terrifying possibility of being talked about during sermon.
You once got mentioned anonymously, a sinner who creeps by night, stealing souls and coin alike. You slouched lower in the pew and stole a roll on the way out. Some of your brethren tried to stay on the clergy's good side, donations here, whispered confessions there. You've even heard of bribes in the form of relics, fake saint bones swapped for silence. One unlucky assassin tried to pass off a boiled chicken leg as part of Saint Crispin. The priest sniffed it, muttered something about divine revenge, and now that guy twitches every time he hears Gregorian chant. Historians still argue whether medieval clergy ever condoned selective assassinations. Papal records suggest some political killings may have been quietly endorsed or at least conveniently ignored, especially when the target happened to be a problematic noble or a heretical loudmouth. But try proving that in court while wearing blood-stained gloves. Your current mission tiptoes the ecclesiastical line. A lay brother went missing last week after poking around tax records and asking questions about a bishop's wine cellar. Now you're here, trying to figure out who else noticed. You slip into a confessional booth. No one's inside, but it muffles your voice. You whisper the code phrase. The lamb walks backwards on Wednesdays. Nothing. Then a voice, raspy, female, sounds like it smokes pipeweed laced with pepper. You're late. It's Sister Hild. She's a nun, technically, also your best informant. Her last favor cost you 3 silver and a tunic she insisted was too flashy. It was brown. She slips you a scrap of parchment. They're on to us. Avoid bell towers. Helpful, if cryptic. You stifle a sigh. Nuns, it turns out, make excellent spies. Everyone ignores them. That's how they hear everything. You once saw Hildy bribe a guardsman with pickled eels just to deliver a forged donation receipt. But your reputation is shaky. A priest caught you once mid-escape, barefoot and bleeding in his vegetable garden. He offered you soup. You thanked him. He never turned you in. You still wonder if he thought you were a saint in disguise or just terribly lost. You didn't correct him. There are myths among your guild of holy men using divine visions to uncover contracts, of cursed relics that reveal secrets if held at dawn, or abbots who cleanse sinners by drowning them in barrels. Fringe nonsense? Maybe. But you still sleep with iron nails under your pillow, just in case. One of your friends, former friends, once tried to launder coin through a monastery, claimed the brothers of St. Vestroni were business savvy. They turned him in before he reached the chapel gates. He now lives in a hut and swears fish speak Latin. The danger isn't always divine. Sometimes it's bureaucratic. A scribe might copy a contract. A bishop might pocket gold and then double-cross you for penance points. The problem with morality, it's flexible, especially if you're the one writing the commandments. You leave the chapel through a side door, head low, boots silent on the flagstones. Outside, the bells toll. 6 o'clock, evening prayers. You walk briskly, resisting the urge to check behind you. No one follows, you think. The truth is, you'll never know for sure. But you do know this: if heaven's watching, it's got a long report on you.
You wake up scratching. Again. It starts with a spot behind your ear and spreads like a whispered conspiracy. You fling off your blanket, if it can be called that, and inspect the culprit. A welt the size of a plum, pulsing gently like it has ambitions of its own. Welcome to the unspeakable joy of medieval hygiene, or rather, the total absence of it. You stagger to the basin, splash some water on your face, and immediately regret it. The water smells like boiled turnips left in a stable. But it's all you've got, and you're trying not to think about what might be swimming in it. You dab at the latest rash with a scrap of linen and murmur a half-hearted curse. Maybe it was that inn near the docks, or the hay cart you napped in, or possibly, definitely, that weird cheese merchant who offered you a back rub from the gods. You tug on your tunic, still crusted from yesterday's rain, and swear softly as a leech drops out of your boot. Just the one this time. A small mercy. Let's be honest. Being an assassin is not glamorous. You don't get time for exfoliation or self-care. Your life is a blur of grimy rooftops, half-remembered inns, and bathing precisely never. You've tried. Public bathhouses are great, unless you're a wanted criminal and someone recognizes the scar on your shoulder while you're elbow-deep in soap lather. Historically, medieval cleanliness varied wildly. Contrary to popular belief, not everyone was constantly filthy. Some towns had functioning bathhouses, and certain nobles bathed regularly, especially in places like Islamic Cordoba or Byzantine Constantinople. But in plague-ridden European alleys where you operate, hygiene was optional. Death, however, was always in fashion. You carry a pouch of crushed mint, mostly to mask the smell when you meet clients. Doesn't work. They pretend not to notice. You once tried cologne made from fermented rosewater and clove. That ended with a swarm of wasps and a truly humiliating sprint through an herb market. And then there's the plague. You never see it coming, it just arrives. Quietly, horribly. Spots and swelling, fever and fear. You lost a contact in Prague to it. One day he's fencing you a dagger, the next he's wrapped in linen and dropped in a cart full of bell ringers. You've had brushes, fevers that passed, sores that faded, but the memory never quite leaves you. Leeches, of course, are the universal cure. Cut yourself? Leeches. Bit by a bat? Leeches. See a ghost? Leeches. You've had more leeches on your body than lovers at this point. One apothecary in Bruges swore by tempered mud poultices and a diet of bread crusts. You swore at him when your rash turned neon pink. Then there's the medieval remedy scene. Powdered worm husks for circulation, ground pearl for strength. You once snorted something called bishop's salt before a mission. You're still not sure if it helped, but you did spend 20 minutes complimenting a coat rack before vomiting in a holy well. Historians still argue whether most of these cures worked or just kept you too busy sneezing to die. Fringe fact of the evening, some nobles rubbed crocodile dung on their skin as sunscreen. Not just weird, expensive. You're still amazed at the lengths people will go to while ignoring things like soap and sleeves. You have a recurring rash on your left shin. You've named it Paul. Paul flares up after damp missions, and sometimes you swear it pulses to the rhythm of church bells. You've stopped asking healers for help. Their solutions range from boil parsley and whisper secrets to lick a copper coin and howl. Even your tools conspire against cleanliness. Poison vials leak, garrets soak up sweat, blade hilts grow fuzzy with mildew. You once drew a dagger and flung a chunk of mold at your target. They were so confused they fell off a balcony trying to dodge it. Accidental success is still success. Every new town means another gamble. Do you drink the water? Risk the fish? Trust the smiling stable hand who offers you ale with the consistency of soup? Your intestines are a battleground. You've learned to carry dried fruit and hard cheese. Safe, stinky, and just barely edible. But at least it doesn't whisper back. You long for a cure-all, a soap that doesn't cause hives, a cream that soothes more than it screams. But for now, It's crushed herbs, prayer-like muttering, and the occasional desperate roll in lavender bushes you accidentally fall into outside monasteries. You head out into the morning fog, skin still itching, breath sharp with mint and mystery. Your target today is a spice merchant. Irony, anyone?
You're crouched behind a vegetable cart that smells deeply of onion sadness, eyes locked on a loaf of bread. Not because you're hungry, though let's be honest, you are, but because that loaf contains a letter. Or at least it should. Your guild's preferred method of communication is anything but elegant. Dead drops, they call them. Romantic in theory. Secret messages, hidden compartments, clandestine exchanges under moonlight. In practice, it's stale food, confusing symbols, and the vague fear that pigeons will eat your intel before you do. You dart forward, swipe the loaf, and disappear into a side alley. You crack it open like an egg. Inside, parchment, a smear of apple butter, and what appears to be a beetle leg. Wonderful! The note's written in code, standard substitution. You recognize the sloppy shorthand of Barnack the Blowpipe Boy. He's worse at encryption than he is at eye contact. Back at your hideout, you light a stub of candle and decode the message. It's a location, a time, and the phrase, "Bring the blue feather." You groan. Last time someone asked for a blue feather, it turned out to be a euphemism for bribing a nun. The time before that, literal feather, for a hat. Guild humor never improves. Historically, clandestine messaging relied on dead drops long before anyone coined the term. Couriers, carved symbols, and simple objects were repurposed for espionage. Some scholars argue that certain medieval stone carvings in major cities like London and Paris may have functioned as markers for rendezvous points. Others think that's a generous interpretation of bored stonemasons. You've left messages under barrels, inside candlesticks, even carved into soap. That one washed away before it was read. You once attempted to train a carrier pigeon. You named him Maurice. Maurice flew straight into a chimney and emerged moments later as a cautionary tale. You're still finding ash in your satchel. And the people who receive your messages? Not always the most reliable. One innkeeper mixed up your signal with his stew recipe. The target survived, but he did remark that his dinner tasted surprisingly treacherous. Then there's the breadcrumb system. Literally. A junior guildmate once thought it clever to leave actual trails of breadcrumbs leading to meeting points. Cute, until every pigeon in the district turned it into a buffet and the local guards got suspicious of birds congregating by well covers. You're still annoyed. That's where you kept your emergency dagger. Once, in desperation, you left a message sewn into the hem of a dress worn by a baroness. It worked, barely. She caught you adjusting her skirt and yelled something about moth devils. You escaped by pretending to faint. You've also used hand signs, subtle nods, candle positioning. One guildmaster insisted on toads. If a toad was facing east, it meant danger. If it croaked 3 times, go home. If it croaked twice and vomited, you were already too late. Fringe tidbit. In some corners of medieval China and Persia, secret messages were hidden inside boiled eggs.
Write on the shell with acid, let it seep into the white, then peel and read. You once tried it, failed spectacularly, ended up with poisoned egg salad and a very confused dog. Even with your best efforts, sometimes the messages go missing. You once returned to retrieve a pouch hidden inside a cracked wall, only to find it replaced with a note that simply read, "Nice try." To this day, you don't know who wrote it, but you respect the craft. You try to modernize things. Brief glyphs etched under market stalls, patterns made with colored thread, but then someone rewashes the laundry or decides red thread is bad luck and your whole plan collapses like a shoddy siege tower. So now you double everything. 2 messages, 2 drop points, 1 decoy just for luck. You're paranoid, yes, but you're still alive. Tonight's message? Another meeting, another job. Client requires discretion and a bottle of elderberry wine. You hope that's a euphemism, but let's be honest, it probably isn't.
You're perched on the edge of a chamber screen, knees aching, fingers poised on the hilt of a dagger, waiting for your target to finish monologuing. He's pacing back and forth in his underclothes, gesturing with a half-drunk goblet of spiced wine, delivering what he clearly thinks is a historic soliloquy about betrayal, destiny, and his unrivaled collection of ceremonial spoons. You sigh, loudly. Assassination would be easier if people just stopped talking. You didn't expect to be caught in a 10-minute drama about provincial land disputes and which cousin insulted whose falcon trainer. But here you are, crouched behind velvet drapery, wishing he'd get to the part where he conveniently turns his back, or just sits down and shuts up. Either would work. Historically, noble households were performative places. Public image mattered. Even in their most private moments, nobles rehearsed speeches, practiced lines for court appearances, and occasionally delivered flowery rants to no one in particular. You've witnessed more unsolicited poetry than a balladier's ex-wife. The Blade of Justice, this one calls himself. Ironically, he's about to meet yours. The first rule of noble targets: never interrupt them mid-rant. They'll think you're a ghost, a vision, a messenger from a rival god. Once, a baron you were sent to unalive told you his entire life story after you startled him mid-shaving, cried, hugged you, then ran straight into a suit of armor. You didn't even have to unsheath your blade. Bless his heart. But the talking doesn't end with the mark. Everyone around them also has opinions. Servants mutter, advisors speculate. One valet once told you the exact number of lovers his mistress had, alphabetically. You didn't ask. He just needed to share. Assassins, it turns out, make excellent therapists. Quiet, attentive, and technically forbidden from gossiping, unless paid. Your guild jokes about it. Dead men talk, the living talk more. Both are exhausting. There's a running tally of most verbose targets in your ledger. Current winner? Lord Eustace of Kent, who begged for his life with a 38-minute confession that included 2 bad jokes, a limerick, and one surprisingly heartfelt apology to his dog. Fringe detail. Some nobles believed their final words would echo through history. There are accounts, some embellished, some likely true, of lords rehearsing dramatic farewells weeks in advance. One duke hired a playwright to script his death speech. You know this because you killed the playwright. Nice man. terrible tipper. Historians still argue whether noble executions were meant to be solemn affairs or political theater. But when your target insists on being stabbed in the garden for symbolic resonance, you lean toward the latter. Then there's the bizarre intimacy of listening to someone's last thoughts. Some beg, others bargain, a rare few thank you, like you're freeing them from something worse. One woman slipped you a note before she bled out. "Tell my husband I knew." You didn't know what she meant. Still don't. Haunting. You keep your face blank. Always. No nods, no sighs, no reactions. You're a whisper, a shadow, a listening post with a blade. But inside, you're cataloging every line, every stumble, every awkward pause. One assassin keeps a diary of last words. He calls it the death monologues. It's secretly hilarious. Tonight's noble finally pauses, swirls his wine, and says, "And so, this is how greatness ends." Perfect. You step from the shadows. He gasps. You make a small bow. "Thank you for the performance," you say, and for once, your voice doesn't shake. Because if there's one thing you've learned from all these tragic little speeches, it's timing. You strike cleanly, he crumples into silence. And for once, no encore.
You're sprawled in a broom closet the size of a bread box, breathing through your mouth and cursing every link of chainmail currently wedged under your ribs. The plan was simple. Sneak into the guard barracks disguised as a wounded soldier, reach the commander's office, and replace his appointment scroll with something a little more cancelable. But no one told you that assassinating someone while wearing armor would feel like trying to do yoga inside a tin drum. It started with a borrowed cuirass, 3 sizes too big and inexplicably damp. Then came the greaves, which clanked like a drunk blacksmith juggling pots. You gave up on the helmet after realizing you couldn't hear anything besides your own panicked breathing. And moving? Every step was a musical number composed entirely of squeaks and despair. Real historical footnote: armor was absolutely practical for soldiers expecting to be hit with swords or arrows, but for stealth missions, not ideal. Even lighter male shirts weighed 20 pounds and jingled like festive doom. Historians still argue whether covert agents ever wore full armor at all. The prevailing theory: only if they planned to get caught in style. You stumble down the hallway like a haunted cupboard, every guard glancing your way. "New recruit," you mutter. They nod. Poor fools. You look ridiculous. More rust than rogue. The shoulder plates grind together with every shrug, and somewhere under the breastplate, you're sweating like a nervous duck. You try to draw your blade. The hilt catches on your belt. You give it a yank, clatter. It falls with a sound that might as well be a gong. You freeze. So does the nearest guard. Time stands still. A drop of sweat rolls down your nose and lands with the subtlety of a thunderclap. Then he shrugs. "First day?" "Yup," you croak, voice muffled under a wool scarf. "Good luck," he mutters and strolls on. Bless inattentive bureaucracy. You inch forward, joints stiff, reminding yourself this was your idea. "Blend in," they said. "Disguise yourself as the enemy." What they didn't say was that the enemy doesn't routinely crouch in corners trying to scratch under a pauldron with a dagger sheath. Fun tidbit. One assassin you knew swore by boiled leather armor. Quieter than metal, lighter too. Downside: smells like wet boots and beef jerky in the rain. Not a great way to stay invisible. And definitely not if you're hiding in a bakery chimney like you had to last week.
You eventually find the commander's office. You creak the door open an inch at a time, praying the hinges don't scream. Inside, papers, maps, a goblet of spiced ale, and a very alert house cat on the desk. It watches you approach with disdain. You freeze. Cats, the natural enemy of assassins since time immemorial, and this one looks like it knows your social security number. You whisper a bribe. "Nice kitty." It blinks. You reach for the scroll. It hisses. You flinch. The armor creaks, the goblet falls, crash. The next 10 seconds are a blur of noise, panic, and pure adrenaline. You dive out the window, backwards, impressively, land in a privy cart, and pop up trailing something unspeakable. You're alive. The scroll is bamfed, but intact. You clank your way down the alley, armor scraping like a dying cello. The blacksmith will want it back, but you're tempted to melt it down yourself, recast it into something useful, like a doorknob, or 6 extremely heavy spoons. Because if there's anything you've learned, it's this. Silence is golden, and chainmail is not.
You enter the tavern under your usual blend-in mode. Slightly slouched, cloak damp with road dust, and a face that says, "Don't ask me about my night." It's crowded, elbow to elbow, voices overlapping in an ale-soaked haze, firelight dancing off dented tankards and questionable moral decisions. You could really use a quiet drink. Unfortunately, quiet doesn't live here. You elbow your way to a corner table, just as a bard screeches the opening line of a song about a lonely night and an overly curious badger. Great. You signal the barkeep. 1 ale, no questions. 2, if it's strong enough to make you forget the last 3 contracts. Taverns are necessary evils. You don't like them, but you need them for gossip, info drops, meeting shady nobles with even shadier motives. You once heard about a duke's affair because his mistress got tipsy and tried to toast to forbidden love and sharp daggers. Subtle, she was not. Tonight's intel says your contact's here. You scan the crowd. Everyone looks suspicious, including the drunk friar slow dancing with a mop, and the 2 men pretending their game of dice isn't rigged. You're 5 seconds from abandoning the mission when someone slides into the seat across from you. She's in her mid-50s, chainmail-trimmed cloak, smells faintly of lilac and danger. Her code name's Violet. You last worked together 5 years ago. That ended with a flaming bakery, 2 missing fingers, hers, and a bounty you're still technically dodging. She smirks. You owe me a drink. You sigh. Of course. Historically, medieval taverns weren't the dim-lit fairy tale nooks we often imagine. They were loud, grimy, and bursting with rumors, backdoor trades, and unsanctioned wrestling. Many were run by widows or opportunistic ex-soldiers. Some were unofficial information hubs. Scholars still argue whether most deals were struck in royal courts or drunk over soup and pickled eggs. This one definitely leans pickled. Violet slips a folded map under your mug, then snatches a sip of your ale. Rude, but standard practice. She says, "It's the merchant's route. He carries more than spices." You cock a brow. Contraband? "Secrets," she whispers, smirking. "Spelled wrong and sealed with cheese wax." Classic. You part ways after exchanging fake insults and real nods. As she disappears into the crowd, a bard stumbles over with a lute and asks for a request. You mutter, "Silence," but he launches into a weepy tune about lost cows anyway. And then,
Like clockwork, trouble. A brawl breaks out 2 tables over. Someone insulted someone's hat. A pitcher flies. A man screams about his mother's dowry goats. You grab your mug and duck as a chair splinters inches above your head. You try to slip out unnoticed. No dice. Someone blocks the door. An old rival, face like boiled leather, nose still crooked from your last encounter. Thought you were dead, he snarls. I was. Got bored. He lunges. You duck, spin, and accidentally trip him into a barrel of pickles. You make it outside with 1 bruised elbow and 0 dignity. Fringe detail. One notorious 14th century assassin reportedly maintained a private tavern just to listen. Called it the Crooked Tankard. Rumors say it had secret tunnels, trapdoors under stools, and a menu so bad even spies wouldn't touch the stew. Back in your own alley, you unwrap the wax-sealed scroll from Violet. The script is bad. The intel's worse. But it's something. A lead. A threat. A reason to keep moving. You rub your temple, ears still ringing with tavern songs, heart still thumping from that brawl. Maybe next time you'll try a library, or a monastery, or literally anywhere without a bard named Clement screaming about goats. But deep down, you know the truth. Assassins always end up in taverns.
You're hunched over a cracked table in your least favorite safe house, one with a perpetual mildew problem and a ceiling beam you've headbutted more times than you'll admit, rereading the details of your latest failed contract. And for once, it wasn't your fault. The mark? Eliminated. The escape route? Smooth as butter. The problem? Someone else got there first. Sloppily, loudly, and left behind a dagger with a sigil you haven't seen in years. Someone's moving through your turf, another assassin, and they're worse than you. Not worse in skill. That would almost be flattering. No, worse in execution. Flashy kills, bodies left in fountains, calling cards stamped with red wax like this is some kind of theatrical showcase. They're not just stealing your work, they're announcing it. You, on the other hand, specialize in discretion. The kind of jobs where the client doesn't even know if the person died or just went on an exceptionally long vacation. It starts to gnaw at you. You compare notes with guildmates. 3 contracts gone sideways, 2 false leads, 1 botched job that ended with a stable boy getting knighted because everyone thought he'd foiled a murderer. It was chaos, and every time that same symbol left behind, a curled serpent biting its own tail, drawn in something disturbingly sticky. Fringe lore time. There's a recurring myth in assassin circles about the Ghost Guild, a rogue group of freelancers with no allegiance, no rules, and a penchant for poetic irony. They say one of their agents once killed a noble by trapping him inside a library, death by boredom and dusty scrolls. Historians still argue whether this ghost guild was real or just a campfire warning to keep apprentices humble. But this agent? Real, sloppy, and reckless enough to endanger you. Because now the guards are jumpy, informants are getting silenced before you can reach them, and one client sent a live rooster in a box with a note that read, "Try harder." You spend 2 weeks trailing shadows, following half-rumors. At one point, you dress as a fishmonger's apprentice for 3 straight days just to monitor whispers near the docks. You smell like cod and crushed ego. And then, finally, You spot them. In the crowd outside a puppet show of all places, leaning against a post, watching the same man you've been assigned to eliminate. You trail them, carefully. They're good, slippery, but you have a gift for reading the flow of a crowd, for feeling the pauses in foot traffic, sensing the ripple of someone out of place. You get close enough to see their eyes, sharp, gray, absolutely infuriating. You don't confront them, not yet. You follow them to a rooftop, watch them practice with a dagger that glints like it's been polished with narcissism. They hum while they work. You want to scream. You decide to hit them where it hurts. Reputation. Next contract, you arrive early. Leave a note for your would-be rival. You take the next one. I'll make this one disappear. The client finds your subtle artistry refreshing. The mark disappears without a sound, the room left pristine, a single folded handkerchief with your sigil left under the teacup. It becomes a game. One job, you disable their tools. Another, you swap their target's clothing to confuse the strike. You intercept a courier. You rewrite a map. One time, you leave decoy footprints in a rooftop garden leading to a goat pen. That one's still your favorite. Still, they keep coming. Contracts stolen, messages muddled. Once they faked a contract under your name. A noble you had no quarrel with ends up dead, and suddenly you're dodging bounty hunters with more zeal than sense. The guild is no help. Some members think it's funny. Others suspect you are the imposter. One junior assassin tries to challenge you for your ledger. He ends up locked in a pantry, covered in goose grease and doubt. Finally, one night, there's a message, scrawled on your wall in charcoal. Meet me where the moon touches the gallows. Midnight. Come alone. You arrive. They're waiting. Hood down, arms crossed, face too smug for your liking. You're good, they say. You're insufferable, you reply. And for a moment, just a sliver of moonlit breath, you almost respect them. But only just. Because in your world, competition isn't just annoying, it's dangerous. And the worst part? They're not done yet.
You're squinting at a wax-sealed pouch dangling from the foot of a very annoyed pigeon. It's flapping frantically around your attic window, eyes full of secrets, feathers full of judgment. You finally coax it down with some stale oat crumbs and a few sincere apologies for the last time you called its cousin a feathered traitor. Inside the pouch, your payment, or what should be your payment. 2 copper coins, a half-eaten prune, and a note. More to come. Be patient. Your eye twitches. The thing about being an assassin is this: the risk is high, the hours are long, and the benefits package non-existent. No retirement, no guild-funded healing potions, and certainly no timely payroll system. You were promised 15 silver for the merchant contract. So far, you've received vague IOUs, suspicious barter items, and 1 baked eel you were expected to flip on the black market. You confronted a client once, marched right into his sitting room, sword unsheathed, boots dripping gutter mud onto his very plush rug. He offered you tea, then launched into a tirade about delayed royal funds and anticipated dowries. You left with a decorative urn and a strong suspicion he was testing you. You sold the urn to a priest and used the money to buy new boots. Historically, the payment process for unofficial services was patchy at best, Some nobles used intermediaries, trusted couriers, scribes, or debt markers. Others left coins in sealed reliquaries. More than one chronicled case involves assassins being paid with land deeds, conveniently located in plague zones. Historians still argue whether this reflects tactical cruelty or just incredibly lazy bookkeeping. You once accepted a goat as partial payment. You named her Mildred. She ate your spare cloak and escaped into the hills. You still mourn her and the cloak. Fringe tidbit. A certain Florentine noble kept a ledger of freelance killers under pseudonyms like Cousin Pebble and The Third One. Payment was tracked in wine bottles. One assassin, possibly drunk with accounting power, once billed for 3 emotional damages and a new hat. But it's not just the erratic payments. It's the ghosting. Clients disappear. One day they're pouring you mulled wine and whispering sweet conspiracies. The next, their manners mysteriously locked, and no one remembers ever meeting you. You left a strongly worded message once, a severed pig's tail tied in ribbon. It was ignored. The worst offenders? Anonymous patrons. They hide behind intermediaries and flowery requests. Please ensure the sunset never touches his brow again. Dramatic, yes, but where's your coin? You completed that contract 3 weeks ago. All you got was a thank you haiku and a basket of unfamiliar roots labeled to help with your complexion. You tried refusing non-payment once, withholding results. The guild frowned on it. Tarnishes the brand, they said. You responded with a carefully folded napkin spelling "pay me" in dried beet juice. Now you keep ledgers, color-coded. Categories include paid in full, paid in pie, disappeared, and ongoing nonsense. The pie wasn't even good. You fantasize sometimes. A regular salary, a supervisor who checks in, a benefits plan that includes rash balm and leech removal. Instead, you operate on faith, favors, and the sinking feeling that someone's made a lot more off your work than you ever will. Tonight's note included another line. A bonus awaits for swift service. That's rich coming from someone who considers a pigeon-delivered prune acceptable currency. Still, you pocket the copper and burn the parchment. You've got a new target, a wine merchant with political ambitions and an unfortunate allergy to lavender. And if the client doesn't pay this time, you've got Mildred's cousin tied up behind the stables. She bites.
You're staring at your reflection in a puddle. Not out of vanity. Your face currently sports 3 fresh scratches and at least 1 bruise that looks suspiciously boot-shaped, but because it's the only mirror you can afford right now. The sky above is gray, drizzle thickening into proper rain, and your cloak's as soaked as your spirit. You've just completed another job. Neat, quiet, efficient, and once again, you've been paid in promises and pickles. You're starting to think retirement sounds nice. But here's the problem. There's no such thing as retirement in your line of work. There's just quitting. And usually someone else decides when that happens. You've seen it before. A veteran vanishes. His ledger gets redistributed. His accidents start happening to other people. One week they're breathing, the next they're a cautionary tale whispered at guild meetings and disguised as jokes. You meet with your handler in an alley that smells like boiled socks. She hands you a coin pouch. It's suspiciously light. You're expensive, and expendable, she says. You nod like you haven't heard that 100 times before. Inside the pouch is a single silver and a note. Final job, no loose ends. You don't need it spelled out. The mark is you. Your own name. It doesn't surprise you, not really. Guild politics, jealous rivals, unpaid favors. It was only a matter of time. You've stepped on too many toes and outperformed too many mediocrities with fragile egos and sharp pens. Historians still argue whether internal purges in assassination guilds were common or rare, and whether retirement ever meant more than early burial. But in your bones, you've always known. No gold watch, no final toast, just a quiet room, a fast blade, and some vague assurance that your name won't be entirely scrubbed from the ledgers. You run. Not far, just far enough. South, to the coast. You dye your cloak, grow a beard, change your name to Finn, a fishmonger with a limp and suspiciously good knife skills. The village welcomes you, sort of. You're quiet, helpful, weirdly efficient at gutting eels. But it doesn't last. One morning, you find a chalk mark on your door, a crescent and a slash, a guild symbol, old style. You erase it, but the message is clear. They've found you. You prepare. The blade under the bed, traps by the window. You train the neighbor's dog to growl at anyone wearing boots that shine too much. You sleep less, eat quicker, dream sharper. You're no longer an assassin. You're a target with excellent instincts and very little to lose. And still, no one comes. Not for weeks, then months. You begin to wonder if the message was a warning or a goodbye. If the guild couldn't bring itself to kill you, but couldn't let you stay. A kind of retirement, maybe. Not peaceful, not official, just tolerated absence. Fringe fact. A few records mention former agents living as hermits, scribes, or even bakers. Disguises that turned into lifestyles. One became a monk who brewed the strongest ale in the region and rarely spoke. People called him Brother Quiet. You admire his strategy. You stay in the village, fix nets, tell stories about far-off cities you read about in a book. You get good at dodging questions. Your hands stay steady. Your reflexes remain sharp. Because even if they never come, you'll never truly rest. Because this isn't a profession, it's a sentence. And every sunrise feels like parole.
Now, as promised, here's your gentle wind down. The storm outside fades to mist. Somewhere, a cockerel begins to stir, soft, distant, indifferent. Inside your small wooden room, the fire flickers low. The warmth of it laps gently at the soles of your feet, and your shoulders, ever watchful, finally begin to settle. Your hands, once so used to tension, now rest open and still beside you. The blade at your bedside remains untouched, its edge dulled by time and disuse. You think of the rooftops, the disguises, the whispered names, and feel no weight from them, only distance. The past doesn't vanish, but it does soften, like parchment in steam. The stories follow you, but no longer chase, and as the last embers pop in the hearth, You let go of the silence, too. Sleep comes not as a thief, but as an old friend, quiet, understanding, unarmed. You've survived. You've outlived the guild, the whispers, the game. And for tonight, at least, you're free. Sweet dreams.